Get your room 16 all ready to go.
Oh, I won't call you Emily, but thank you for that. That's great. Okay, so we'll start the session in 5, 4, 3. Order. Welcome to this morning's session of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee, where we have the pleasure of bringing two Secretary of State level spokespeople from behalf of the government, the President of COP26, Alok Sharma, in the first panel, and Kwarteng, the new Business Secretary, in the second panel, where we'll be talking about the Energy White Paper and some other broader issues at the BEIS department. For the first hour today, as I say, we're delighted to welcome Alok Sharma, who's now the full-time President of COP26, and we're grateful that the President was able to find the time still to be with us, having had this in the diary. The BEIS Secretary of State, we're grateful that you're with us today, alongside Peter Hill, who is the CEO of COP26, Archie Young, who is the UK lead climate negotiator, and Ross Ailes, who's the Chief Operating Officer for COP26, to welcome to all of you. Alok, before we begin, do I call you Secretary of State, Mr. President, or Mr. Sharma? I quite like Mr. President. Is that your preference?
I think we stick with Alok. We know each other well enough now, I think, Chair.
Okay, I'll call you Alok in that case. Well, Alok, you'll have seen that at the liaison committee this week, I asked the Prime Minister what his ambition was from COP26. And he said he wanted as many countries around the world to sign up to the net zero journey as possible. Is that the headline ambition for you as COP President, or would you provide a few other bits around that?
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. And look, it's always a pleasure to be in front of the Business Select Committee. I'm sure there'll be more occasions during this year that I'll be coming forward in front of you. 2021 is obviously going to be a very big year for climate. It's going to be a big year for the UK. As well as COP26, we have the G7, and then our COP partners, Italy, have the chairmanship of the G20. And I think one of the things I'm very keen on is that throughout all of these international gatherings, we have what I describe as the golden thread of climate action woven through them. I think that is so vitally important, and the UK, of course, has a big part to play in making sure that happens. We had, as you know, at the end of last year, the Climate Ambition Summit. We had 75 leaders from around the world coming together. It's an event that was hosted by the Prime Minister together with the UN Secretary General and President Macron. And 75 world leaders made concrete commitments. There were commitments clearly on net zero, which is vitally important, but also commitments on nationally determined contributions. And clearly those short-term aims of how you get on the pathway to net zero is going to be really important. And what I said at that speech that I did at the end of that event was there were sort of 4 areas that we wanted to particularly focus on. The first was a step change in mitigation, so making sure that all countries come forward with ambitious NDCs. Second was for countries to strengthen their adaptation plans, and of course the UK set out its own adaptation plan when it submitted its NDC to the UNFCCC. And then, of course, very importantly, getting finance flowing. You know, there is this totemic $100 billion a year figure of finance that has been promised by developed countries. And I think we need to deliver on that and, of course, see how we can get private finance flowing. And then the final thing was the increase in international cooperation. So first, of course, ensuring that the outstanding items in the Paris rule book are closed off and we have a fair and negotiated outcome on that. And then, of course, in terms of driving that international cooperation, we've got 5 campaigns that we've got running on nature, on adaptation resilience, on clean energy, zero emission vehicles, and of course, finance. So what I'd say in conclusion to your initial question is that I want this to be the most inclusive COP ever. And I'm very happy as we go through the questioning to talk about what we're doing to ensure that that happens.
Well, thank you for that, Alok. One of the concerns that have been raised recently is about the decision by government, specifically your colleague, Robert Jenrick, to not intervene in the new coal mine decision in Cumbria. As the previous BEIS secretary, were you part of any discussions with MHCLG about trying to say that new coal power stations in the UK is not in line with our climate commitments or what we're trying to tell other countries in the world?
Yeah, so I mean, what I'd say is that obviously, the decision that was made there was about allowing a local authority to take on that decision making. What I'd say more broadly, of course, is that we have had a big impact in bringing down the mix of coal as part of our energy mix, and we've got a commitment to end coal usage as well. And in addition to that, you will have also seen the commitment the Prime Minister's made when it comes to stopping the financing, international financing support on coal that was made at the UK Africa Investment Summit last year, but then also in terms of other areas where, of course, we've been providing financing as well to other countries, stopping that when it comes to carbon.
Sure. I mean, in that context, my perspective, it's pretty embarrassing that we're starting a new coal power station in the UK. I mean, surely you had a discussion with colleagues in government to say this wasn't the right direction of travel.
Well, I mean, obviously, what I don't want to do, Chair, you will forgive me, is to go into the details of discussions that we may have had in government, either at ministerial or officials level. But clearly, the direction of travel for the UK is very clear, and I completely understand the point that you're making.
Okay, just one last question from me before I open it up. There's obviously a lot of discussion about how much progress we'll make at COP26 in meeting the 1.5 degree C target in the Paris rulebook. And we've had some evidence before as a select committee that the language suggests that we might not get there, but that's okay. And the witnesses have said to us, that's really not okay. We need to get to 1.5 degrees C cap post-industrial levels. What's your view on COP26 and how much progress we'll make towards that target under Paris?
Well, so you've seen obviously the commitments to net zero that have been made by major economies. I think we've seen a change, a momentum shift actually during the last year in terms of the commitments that have been made by Japan, by South Korea. I was in South Korea on the day that actually President Moon made his commitment to net zero. We've seen the commitments made by China to net zero before 2060, and of course we've got the incoming Biden administration as well. Obviously, we want to make best efforts to bend that curve. 2 degrees closer to 1.5 degrees is what's set out in the Paris Agreement. I think we want to, obviously make every effort to get there. Now, what's encouraging is that we have now had 43 enhanced NDCs that have come forward. But I have to say, and I made this very clear at the Climate Ambition Summit, is that clearly we're going to need to make a lot more progress during this year if we're going to get to that point of being able to bend the curve downwards.
Thank you for that. I should have said at the beginning that we are also delighted to welcome Philip Dunn, who's the chair of the Environmental Audit Committee today, and his colleagues Jerome Mayhew and Alok Sabel. I've got a quick supplemental from Jerome, and then I'm going to go to Philip for the next question. Jerome, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sharma, you addressed 4 key objectives for the COP. The first one was mitigation, and the fourth one was increasing the levels of international cooperation. I'm sure you're aware that there's a growing head of steam behind supporting the international introduction of border carbon adjustments as being a key objective of COP26. And domestically, I noted there's an article in the Times just yesterday from the economics editor suggesting that this was a tariff that could actually assist in economic recovery and growth. So what's your thinking? Is this something that the government is interested in?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Jerome, that there is, of course, an increasing interest in the idea of a carbon border adjustment around the world. There's no doubt about that. I mean, as you will also know, the EU, I believe, intends to publish some proposals on this later on this year as well. And of course, there are other countries who have expressed concerns about what this might mean for them. I mean, in terms of, well, firstly, just to address your issue about, COP26, I mean, I'm not anticipating this becoming an issue within the negotiations. As you know, it's not a mandated issue. It's not part of the work program, but clearly it may well have an impact in terms of the context of Glasgow itself overall. I mean, when it comes to the UK government, obviously, this is a matter for the Chancellor and the Treasury. What I would say is that I think from a UK perspective, we of course are going to have to consider what are the approaches that we're going to take to tackle carbon leakage. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think in terms of domestic policy, I think that's really one for the Treasury.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerome. Philip Dunn, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, for inviting my members of my committee to join this session. Alok, you will recall that before Christmas, I was one of those who was calling for the role of President of COP26 to be a full-time job. So I'm particularly pleased that you've now got this role. I'm also concerned that you've got enough support, no longer having a full panoply of a government department behind you. I'm pleased you brought the senior executive colleagues of COP26 with you today, but can you give us some reassurance that you will have the resources at your disposal to be able to do in what is now only a few months what it took other governments who hosted COPs before many years to pull together?
Yes, thank you, Philip. Look, I'm very pleased to be now focusing all my energies on this. And as I said, I mean, this is a big moment. COP26 is the biggest event that the UK will ever have organised, and it's vitally important that we make meaningful progress when it comes to tackling climate change. I'll invite Peter Hill, who's CEO of the COP26 unit, to perhaps comment on this, but I certainly feel that we have the support in government. As you know, over the past year, it's obviously been the COP unit, but also other government departments that have been working on this, obviously colleagues at BEIS, at DEFRA, at HMT, who have been a part of this, and of course, our diplomatic network. So if I tell you that, obviously I've done a lot of engagement internationally, I mean, clearly virtually, but a lot of that has been done with countries across the world by the diplomatic network as well. So collectively between us, we have engaged with 126 governments, if I'm right, and we will continue to make an effort. So I'm also very keen that we involve as many cabinet colleagues in this agenda as well going forward, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for this. So I am confident that we will have the support and the resources in government, and I think, as you will have heard from the liaison committee, the Prime Minister is completely behind this agenda as well. Peter, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of resources to reassure Mr. Dunn?
I think you've covered it very well, COP President. We have a significant team in the COP unit who are working night and day on this. And as the COP President has said, sorry, we call him the COP President. As the COP President has said, there's a very significant number of departments with standing teams who are working on this, coordinated in ways that, as you would expect across government, and then at ministerial level by the COP President as chair of the Climate Action Committee and the Prime Minister as chair of the Climate Action Strategy Committee. So I don't myself feel that we lack support at the moment, or the people and expertise we need the job, which of course is not to say that it's not a significant undertaking. No one's in any doubt about that.
Yeah, if I may add just one point on that, which sort of Peter's made as well, is that of course my focus is on COP26, but I continue to chair the Climate Action Implementation Committee. And I think that also allows an opportunity for us, at the same time that we're advancing the international efforts, to continue through the work we've already done on the 10-point plan, the Energy White Paper, which I know you'll discuss with the BEIS Secretary of State after this chair, to advance our domestic agenda. I mean, one of the things that struck me during the last year when I spoke to other governments and encouraged them to be much more ambitious when it comes to NDCs and their long-term strategies. There was always a question about what the UK was going to do. And obviously, last year, the Prime Minister set out our NDC of at least 68% by 2030. And I think that was extremely well received, actually, both by domestically, but also internationally.
Can I just, before I conclude, Darren, just ask Mr. Hill how many people you have in your COP26 team?
At the moment, I think we're around 160.
And do the Foreign Office have a priority in their objectives for this year to give you all the support across missions that you require?
Yes, I think I'm correct in saying that all ambassadors and heads of mission have COP as one of the objectives in their personal objectives and in their mission objectives. and the permanent secretary of the FCDO and the foreign and development secretary have both recently, in recent weeks and months, written to the network in order to ensure that they understand the priority that this needs to be given. And I should just say that that's very helpful and important, but we've not had any lack of engagement from the network overseas, or commitment or interest in pursuing this. They really are pretty gung-ho to push it forward.
Thank you. Alok, as you referred to the liaison committee, the Prime Minister committed that you would appear before Parliament to answer questions on the progress of COP26. So we look forward to more scrutiny and a parliamentary session on the floor routinely. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Philip. Ms. Raghani, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. President, you talk about the enthusiasm and the support to COP. You seem to be throwing the kitchen sink at it. But Mr. President, the French president has 3 years to engage before the Paris summit. The clock is running down. What are you going to do to make up for lost time?
Well, the clock is obviously ticking. There's no doubt about that. But again, I go back to the point is that we obviously haven't sat on our hands over the past year. There's been a lot of engagement. I've engaged with 50 governments. Actually, where I've managed to, I've also gone and done visits. I've been out to South Korea, as I said, to Italy. I was out before we had our first lockdown to New York to meet with the permanent representatives and give a briefing together with the Secretary General. And I've continued to do that actually on an online basis as well. So, and I think that the Climate Ambition Summit, which obviously the UK was, organized obviously together with the UN and France, but we were the leading player in pulling the whole thing together. I think that also demonstrated that during last year, despite COVID, there has been some progress, but clearly we need to do a lot more. So in terms of where we're going to go this year, we will continue the bilateral engagements. I'm also starting a dialogue with the chairs of the various negotiating groups within the UNFCCC process, so that we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty of the detail, which will be important in terms of closing off the elements of the Paris rulebook that are still outstanding. And clearly there is going to be a big diplomatic effort across the piece. You've just heard from Peter Hill, the work that's going on through the Foreign Office, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office as well. The Prime Minister, of course, as was clear from the Liaison Committee, is totally committed to this. He himself has been making calls, been on calls with world leaders, and amongst other things, very much making the case for climate action. So I'm not complacent at all. But I think there is a lot of effort that's going to go into this, we need to make sure that this is a success at the end of the process.
Thank you.
Prime Minister is championing.
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't catch.
Sorry, do you want to try again, Naz? I think the internet.
Thank you. I was just pointing out to the President, he'll be away from home for so long, but he'll need the support of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is obviously throwing his weight behind the principles, but can the President share exactly what part of the programme the Prime Minister is leading on?
Yes, I mean, as I said, I think the Prime Minister is already playing actually a key role in terms of diplomatic efforts. He said he led the UK effort on the Climate Ambition Summit, and I think very many people commented that that was a good event, and we got some good commitments. Clearly, we need to do a lot more. But if I tell you that in terms of the engagements that he's had on climate directly with heads of states, that includes President Xi, Prime Minister Modi, President Macron, Chancellor Merkel, President Moon. I mean, there's a whole range, and obviously, he's already had an introductory call with President Biden, and I think we're looking forward to working closely and in partnership with the new administration when it comes into place. So, I mean, I'd say to you that this is an agenda that the Prime Minister actually has championed for a very long time. I mean, I was with him as a junior minister at the Foreign Office when he was Foreign Secretary, and he was the one who made our commitment when it comes to climate action, doubling of our funding on ICF at UNGA in 2019. So this is something that he has championed for a long period of time. Every conversation that I have with him demonstrates to me that he really wants us to make an effort to succeed, and he is going to be playing a key role in talking to world leaders around the globe.
And finally, Mr. President, some countries are yet to submit ambitious NDCs.
I've lost feed.
We've lost Nusrat again, so I think we'll probably just move on to Judith Cummins, and if Nusrat comes back, we'll try and give her the time to ask that question again.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. My questions are really around the President-elect Biden situation. And what I want to know is how the election of President-elect Biden affected the COP26 unit's preparation, and how are you engaging with the Biden transition team?
Yes, thank you for that. Obviously, Biden presidency is good news in terms of tackling climate change. Very much welcome the commitments that the president-elect's already made in terms of rejoining the Paris Agreement, and of course putting the US on the path to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. We are of course looking forward closely to working closely with the administration following the inauguration. I think, Chair, as you and other colleagues will know, is that right now there are strict limitations on the transition team engaging with foreign governments, and we very much respect that. Nevertheless, we have been engaging with climate policy experts in the US, senior political folks who are close to the incoming administration, and I had a very good conversation with John Kerry prior to his appointment, and I'm looking forward to continuing that dialogue as well, and of course hopefully getting out at some stage in person to the US. We will of course have those formal discussions, but it's worth pointing out that during the last year, actually the COP unit and the rest of our network have of course continued to engage with the US on climate at sub-federal level as well. I've had a number of very good conversations with Eric Garcetti, who is mayor of Los Angeles, but also leads the C40 group of cities, with Jared Blumenfeld, who is the California State Secretary and for the environment, and he sits on our Zero Emission Vehicles Council as well. So we have a very good dialogue with them. And at the Climate Ambition Summit, again, we had one governor representing a Democratic state, one representing a Republican state, and there is some consensus already on this issue, and there are around 29 states in the US which already have in place some sort of clean energy or renewable energy target, and 9 have committed to net zero. So, clearly we're very much looking forward to that formal dialogue with the incoming administration, but we have been talking at various levels already over the past year with players in the US.
Thank you. The President-elect has announced plans to host a meeting of major economies to discuss global climate action. What role is the UK playing in this as co-president of COP, and how does it fit in with the wider COP programme?
Yeah, so we obviously are building up a calendar of events when it comes to COP. There are a whole range of events already in the international calendar where there's an opportunity to talk about climate. I think we welcome the ambition that the incoming administration has to hold an event soon following the inauguration, and obviously we'll work with them on that. What I would say is that obviously the international community will be keen to see the detail of any future US NDC, any future commitments on finance, and I'm very positive about the commitments that were made during the the presidential election, and we are looking forward to working closely with the new administration.
Judith, I'm going to call now Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, President. It's good to see now that there's a dedicated person looking after this aspect. So I guess go back to when the government first announced it was holding the presidency. Do you believe the government fully understood what this would mean and what it would entail?
Obviously, I wasn't there at the bidding stage, and I might invite Peter Hill if he wants to sort of comment at all on this. But look, I mean, everything I've seen since I came into this role, obviously from February of last year, is that absolutely, I think the government very clearly understood what COP was all about. I mean, the UK government's attended obviously all the previous COPs. There's a process of securing the nomination for this role, and the UK government obviously jumped through the hoops on that. And I would just say that, you know, we do actually have a track record, a good track record of organising and delivering big events. So obviously the G8 at Gleneagles, the NATO summit, which took place in 2014, CHOGM, which took place in London in 2018. And last year we had the UK Africa Investment Summit, which I was involved in the organisation of. So we do have a track record in doing these things, but yes, I mean, certainly from what I have seen since I've been in post, is that the UK government has very clearly understood what is required. I mean, Peter, I don't know whether you or Archie is hopefully on. Yeah, so Archie Young is our chief negotiator, and of course has been involved for a number of years as part of the negotiation process. I don't know whether he or Peter want to comment at all in terms of you know, the UK government understanding what we were getting into.
I mean, I can very briefly, I mean, I was in a different role at that time and saw those discussions from a different position. And there was quite careful consideration because it was seen as an enormous opportunity, but also a considerable responsibility. And so at least as far as I was part of it, there was discussion about what the government, what this involved and what the government was taking on. And I can just say, since I started this job, in October the year before last, the Prime Minister has left me in no doubt about the importance that he attaches to this in the UK's overall international efforts for 2020 and 2021. Absolutely, he's been absolutely crystal clear with me about how important this is and the support that we're going to have from across government. But Archie is more of an old hand at COPs than I, so he may want to come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you, COP President Designate. As many of you will know, the process for deciding on the host for COP, it tracks the 5 UN regional groups. And so COP26 was always due to be the turn of the WEOG group, the Western Europe and Other group. When the conversations amongst other WEOG members started towards the end of 2017, there were several countries who were interested, including us and others. And that was really when the conversations across government started. So we've been looking at this for a long time, even before the possibility of UK hosting became public. It was very much a cross-government effort. The conversations are led from BEIS, given that is where our international climate negotiations focus was led from, but it very much included all of the ministries across government that were involved. And it also included going through the appropriate steps in government, you know, the appropriate internal review processes, the appropriate conversations with Treasury to understand what the resources required would be, what the appropriate milestones would be. Of course, nobody foresaw that we would end up having the longest incoming presidency in history of given COVID. So inevitably our plans have had to change and adapt. But actually the unit that was discussed earlier, the way that we have staffed up and prepared ourselves for this has enabled us, I think, to have the resources and the plans ready despite these challenging and uncertain circumstances.
Thank you for that. It seems very positive overall, but when we had Claire O'Neill, the previous president, speaking to the committee, she said there was initially some reluctance amongst departments around the bid. Is there still reluctance? Has it been overcome? Are all the departments now pushing the right direction, President Sharma?
Absolutely. All departments are very much pushing in the same direction on this, and I mean, I can just tell you that cabinet colleagues are very, very keen to be involved and to support this process and to get their departments behind this effort on COP26. So, as I said, I wasn't at the sort of start of the process, but certainly now I can tell you there is a huge amount of momentum. And I think just picking up this point that Archie made is that, this is of all the COP presidencies, this is probably the most unique in the sense of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, not being able to physically meet as we would like, having to do a lot of engagement virtually, but we have continued that. I mean, if I think back during the last year, as well as the engagement that I've done with on a bilateral basis, I've also taken part in about 50 events, with the international climate community, and that's just sort of on the basis of what I've done. The whole team has done an enormous amount of work, and we've had support from other government departments as part of this.
That's good. Good to see there's internal support, but we were also told that the COP unit were unable to recruit externally and unable to get the best people for the role, frankly. Is that still the case? And how are you ensuring that we get the best external hires into your team to actually make the best of this?
Yeah, no, that is certainly not the case. I think if you look at the makeup of the COP unit, again, Peter might want to sort of comment on this, but I mean, it's made up of folks who have particular expertise, who are seconded in from around the civil service. But of course, we also have externals who have been hired in. And it's worth pointing out that we also have the high-level champion, so Nigel Topping, who is leading off on the process of engaging with the non-state actors, getting them to sign up to the Race to Zero campaign, so they commit to going to net zero by 2050 at the latest on science-based targets. I mean, he has a couple of civil servants who work with him, supporting him on a sort of full-time basis. But then he also has access to 50 colleagues who've been seconded in, mostly from the private sector, some of them part-time. So, I mean, what I'd say to you is that I certainly have never felt during the time that I have been involved with COP26 that there has been a hesitancy to take on experts if we need them. And we also have various advisory groups. One of them is the Friends of COP. I think their details are on the COP website. And these are individuals, including actually some former COP presidents as well, and these are experts that we lean on very heavily. I have very regular conversations on an informal basis to get support and thoughts and reaction from those individuals as well. So I certainly don't feel that we have been shy in terms of reaching out and getting external support where we've needed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mark Pawsey, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Alok. Alok, I want to talk about the question of raising the finance for the commitments that were made in the Paris Agreement. And in your opening remarks, you spoke about the need to, I think you said, get finance flowing. I mean, the sums of money to achieve what we want to achieve are eye-wateringly large, and these are for economies that have just had to spend very substantial sums supporting businesses and healthcare systems through COVID. You said we need to get to £100 billion per year by 2025. How are we going to get there?
So thank you for that question. I mean, look, you're absolutely right. Finance and getting it flowing is one of the key aims that we have as part of the COP presidency. And the 100 billion figure, of course, is the figure that we're looking for developed countries to make available through international climate finance for developing countries. And I think this is it's a totemic thing. This and it is a matter of trust. And when I talk to developing countries, they do bring up this issue of, when are we going to reach the goal of 100 billion, which should have been delivered for 2020. We don't. I mean, the latest OECD figures, I think for 2018, show that in 2018 we were under 80 billion a year, and we won't get the figure for 2020 until probably past a COP, but there will be various estimates that I'm sure people will make. And you're right that we also know that this is a difficult time in terms of fundraising, but this is one of the areas that I'm very keen to focus on and ensure that we get funding into the system to support developing countries. I mean, what I would say is that if you look at multilateral development banks, who of course we're working very closely as well, folks like David Malpass, the World Bank, and Kristalina at the IMF. The World Bank obviously spoke at the Climate Ambition Summit, and they have committed to targeting 35% of their spending going towards their sort of contribution to meet climate goals. That I think is a very positive development, but obviously we need to do more. But one side is public finance, and we've set out published a paper very recently setting out what our priorities are when it comes to public finance on COP26. There is also the work that Mark Carney is doing in terms of getting private finance flowing as well. And clearly, we're going to have to make a big effort to ensure that there is more funding that is going towards a climate and climate-related infrastructure and projects around the world.
And how can private financiers be encouraged to make the contributions that are necessary?
Well, part of it is the leverage that you get on any public sector financing, the leverage you'd get on the money that the multilateral development banks put in. But ultimately, and when I was at DFID, one of the things that we looked at was starting a program on how do you make projects more bankable in terms of trying to get private sector money in. Obviously, that is not what the COP26 agenda is sort of mainstream about. But clearly, there is a lot more that we need to do. I mean, it's worth pointing out, of course, that there's been quite a lot of success when it comes to the Race to Zero campaign, and we have got asset managers with trillions of dollars under management, which have signed up to Race to Zero. So there is I think we are at an inflection point where we are seeing the private sector looking at how do you invest in climate, how do you go green yourself, and some of it obviously they'll be driven by people wanting to do the right thing, but it is also driven by shareholder value. I mean, if you look at the market capitalizations of what I would describe as standard economy companies as opposed to green economy companies, you see the divergence across the world in that. So I'm hopeful, but clearly there is a lot that we're going to have to do to get finance flowing.
And you also spoke about the distinction between mitigation projects for the developing world in contrast to adaptation projects that are taking place in the developed world, where the priorities are different. In terms of the mitigation projects, we know that there's something like, I think, £700 billion of annual funding needed there. And the UK, I think, has made an allocation of just £3 billion. Now, in your discussions with developing countries, is our contribution adequate? Are we doing enough, Alok?
Yeah, well, sorry, I think the 3 billion, I think, refers to the increase for nature-based solutions that the Prime Minister's, I think, very recently the announced, and that's part of the 11.6 billion ICF over the next 5 years. And actually, from our point of view, that commitment on nature, I think, is a big commitment. Now we need to make sure that all partners and governments around the world are also then developed countries are stepping forward when it comes to their own commitments on climate finance.
And as a government, we're looking at reducing the amount that we spend on overseas aid. Is that making discussions with developing countries more difficult in terms of encouraging them to adopt the measures that we all know are necessary?
Well, I mean, I think when the policy change was announced, obviously I had feedback from NGOs and those who are connected with development matters. But I mean, I think people have also understood that, you know.
And what kind of feedback was that?
Well, clearly there will be folks within the climate world who feel that you know, we shouldn't have made the reduction. However, I think there is also a very clear understanding that you know, the impact of the pandemic has forced us to take some very tough and necessary decisions. And it's worth pointing out, is that this is, of course, a temporary measure, and you know, we will be returning to spending 0.7% of GNI on ODA when the fiscal situation, of course, allows. But even at the level that we are at, we are still going to be spending you know, more than £10 billion when it comes to you know, fighting poverty, but of course also on climate action. And just in terms of comparing us to others, and I think it's an important point to make, is that we will still spend more of our national income in percentage terms than you know, other developed economies like the US or Japan or Canada or Italy. And if you look at the countries that make up the OECD's Development Assistance Committee, we are still significantly higher as a proportion than the average of the DAC countries as well. So, you know, I think you know, we do an enormous amount of good around the world. I think people have understood why we've had to make the change. But the key point here from a climate perspective is that within that envelope, the 11.6 billion has been protected.
Okay, and do you think this decision means that, or this proposal means that some projects that might have otherwise taken place now won't be able to happen in time?
Well, so, I mean, from a climate perspective, we have protected the 11.6 billion, and I can give you some sort of good examples where we have worked. I mean, just take Colombia as an example, which came forward with a very ambitious NDC of 51%. I've had a number of very good discussions with President Duque, and you know, the government there, you know, has pointed out that they are you know, very positive about the support that we have provided through ICF. So going back to this point about specifically on climate, the 11.6 billion is protected.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Alan Brown, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Alok. Last week, the Prime Minister had said that you'll be able to answer questions in the House on COP26 preparations. Can you confirm that is the case, but more importantly, if that's the case, what the process is going to be?
Yes, I can confirm, Alan, that I will, and we're just working our way through, just working out, you know, precisely how that mechanism will work. But I mean, clearly, we will come to a conclusion that very quickly, and I will write to parliamentary colleagues. I also expect, obviously, to make regular statements to the House, to answer written questions. And you know, I have colleagues across government who, of course, support this as well. So you know, the Minister for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, who is also the COP envoy when it comes to adaptation resilience, will be supporting me when it comes to you know, any business in the House as well on COP26 preparations. I'm very, very keen to emphasize that I want to be as collaborative as possible with parliamentary colleagues, and you know, obviously I've been as Philip Dunn said, you know, I've been in front of his committee previously. Last year I was in front of the Lords Select Committee as well, answering questions on COP26. We had a session in December with APPGs, which was open to all parliamentarians, both obviously in the Commons and the Lords as well, to answer any questions together with the team, and we will continue that. And the other thing I will be doing very, very shortly is inviting the chairs of the appropriate APPGs to meet with me to see how we can work together. I mean, we genuinely want this as a government for this to be the most inclusive COP ever, and that, of course, will include parliamentarians in the UK.
So when you think that opportunity for the questioning in the House of Commons to yourself, that process will be up and running?
Yes, we will. As I said, I will confirm details on how precisely how that will work very shortly. But I mean, clearly, there is a very clear commitment on the part of the Prime Minister, on my part, to engage closely with parliamentarians. Okay, if we look at national delegations to COP26, many other countries include backbench and opposition members. Is that something you're giving consideration to? Well, I think this came up at the liaison committee. I think Philip Dunn may have raised this issue. Look, no decisions obviously have been taken as yet on the form of the UK delegation. We will share any details when we have them, I mean, I'm taking on the suggestion that's being made, but obviously, I think as the Prime Minister said, it was raised liaison committee. We on sort of a committee session like this, obviously, what we're not doing is allocating places. But I have noted the point that's been made. Okay, thanks. You'll be aware that there's also been reports that difficulties between the relationship between the UK government and devolved administrations, including the Scottish government. Claire O'Neill was quite vocal on that, especially when she was in front of the committee. And previously, the media had picked up that a Scottish Tory fringe event, the Prime Minister had said, I don't want to see Nicola Sturgeon anywhere near it in relation to COP26. Do you share the same view as the Prime Minister? Well, my view is the same as the Prime Minister's, which is that we want this to be an inclusive COP. What I can tell you is that I have already set up, and I'm sure you'll have heard from colleagues in the Scottish Government, is that I've already set up a COP26 devolved administrations ministerial group, which is bringing together the environment ministers and the devolved administrations together with the relevant Secretary of State in the UK government. And we had the first meeting of that in November. We're going to do this on a quarterly cycle. And I think the aim is to make sure that we have very effective engagement and collaboration between the UK government and the devolved administrations. I mean, it's worth pointing out that there's a lot of, I would say extensive official level engagement that's already taking place, on all the operational issues relating to Glasgow as well. And that's happening with the Scottish governments, obviously with the City Council and other delivery partners. I was up in Glasgow actually in August, and when I'm able to, I will of course go up again soon to meet again with the delivery partners. I mean, it was a very positive meeting that I had with them, and it's worth pointing out that there is effectively a joint delivery framework that's been agreed between the Scottish delivery partners, which includes the Scottish government and, of course, the COP unit. So we want this to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, I might invite the Chief Operating Officer, Ros Eales, if she wants to comment at all in terms of that day-to-day engagement that's going on up in Scotland.
Thank you, COP President. I think really to echo what you've said at ministerial level, you've obviously engaging with counterparts. That's absolutely reflected at official level. And on a very regularly we are working closely with key delivery partners in Scotland and as part of Scottish Government. So we've got Police Scotland, the City Council in Glasgow, Scottish Ambulance Service, Transport Scotland, just to name a few. And obviously, delivering a safe, secure, and inclusive event requires a very close working relationship with them, but also the governance structures to be right. And as the COP President has outlined, we've got a good delivery framework. We've got a delivery board which includes all of these partners, as you would expect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just for confirmation, there will be no attempts to cut out top levels of the Scottish Government from attending COP26?
Well, I mean, COP26 is obviously going to be open to the public as well. So the idea of sort of cutting people out, I mean, that's not there at all. In fact, one of the things that I would just say to you that I share with the committee that I think we want to think about with the parliamentary authorities is whether the half-term autumn recess this year there can be some overlap with COP26, which will hopefully allow parliamentarians to also go up to Glasgow. So look, I mean, I just say to you, Alan, is that we want this to be as inclusive as possible. This is a UK event, and as I said, I'm working very closely with the DAs, as is the COP team itself.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alok.
Alec, just to check, when you say questions in Parliament, will you be on the rota for questions in the same way departments are?
I will certainly be a part of a rota. That is my current working assumption, Chair. But I will write to you. Look, I just want to be very clear: is that I will make sure that I am available to obviously answer questions, but then also, I think it's quite an important point, is to give regular updates by way of statements to the House as well. And I know as we get into this year, there will be a growing interest in COP26, and it's right and proper that I engage with colleagues on this.
Thank you. And just lastly, we've talked about parliamentary engagement and devolved administrations. A lot of our cities are doing some really interesting leadership on decarbonisation, and there's the group Core Cities, for example, in the UK. Will there be some formal engagement with city leadership as well?
Yeah, there is already formal engagement. We have a cities and regions group that is up and running. We've had one meeting. Clearly, we'll be doing a lot more of those. But again, we want to try and tie all of this together in terms of ensuring that every part of the UK feels involved. Yes, that engagement is ongoing and will ramp up.
Okay, thank you. Alex Sabel, please.
Thank you. First of all, Alok, I'd just like to thank you for your comments regarding all party groups as chair of the Net Zero All Party Group, and the fact that you're looking at potentially having an overlap with parliamentary recess, which would really help the all party group. So my question's really around COVID. We're in the third lockdown now, and obviously this lockdown is due to the new variant of COVID. There might be further shocks in the system, new strains, different effects of that. What steps is the government taking to ensure the summit and the negotiations are COVID secure? Obviously hoping for the best, but planning for the worst.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. A very important point. Can I just go back, Chair, just on the point about the overlap between the half-term parliamentary recess and COP26? Obviously, that's not a decision for me. That is I put that out as something that I think would be useful and appreciated, and clearly, those who make those decisions about the parliamentary recess will, I hope, look favourably on that. In terms of the COP itself and how it'll take place, our clear intent is that we have a main conference which is in person. I think talking to a lot of the parties around the world, they feel actually pretty strongly that we're going to have negotiations that should be conducted in person. It is particularly those countries who are most impacted by climate change that feel very acutely about this particular issue. So we want to try and do this physically. Of course, there has been good news on vaccines. We've seen vaccination rolling out across the United Kingdom. We have access to rapid testing as well. What the COP unit is doing, and in fact, I have a very regular dialogue with Patricia Espinosa as well, but what the COP unit is doing is talking to colleagues in the UNFCCC, because of course we are putting this thing on behalf of the UN, just to understand how the Secretariat's requirements might change given evolving situations, if I can put it like that. But you're right, what we absolutely need to do is, and I don't know whether Peter or Ros might want to sort of comment on this, but we definitely want to ensure that we are protecting the health of any participants, as well as, of course, the local community in Glasgow. That's going to be paramount in terms of our planning. But we are very keen to do everything we can to make sure this is a physical COP. Clearly, there will be an element of, what I want as part of trying to make this more inclusive is that we have learned over the past year that you can do things virtually. So and through the Climate Ambition Summit, of course, which was virtual, we had quite a lot of learnings from that. So we want to see where, both a physical event, but what more we can do virtually to extend, the access, if I can put it like that, to COP26. But I don't know whether from a planning point of view, Ros, you might want to talk about any discussions that you're having with the UNFCCC and indeed the local delivery partners.
Yes, thank you, COP President. I think this actually picks up on the last point in terms of engagement with devolved administrations. Obviously, we need to, respecting the fact that public health is a devolved matter, so we're working very closely with the Scottish Government to understand, the public health protection measures that will be in place in various scenarios, and that's absolutely key, ensuring kind of health of both delegates and health and safety of the local community in Glasgow. So we're working kind of through those various scenarios, and what we are aiming to do is kind of create an inclusive COP, looking at virtual elements as the COP President has said. So thinking how we can use technology to increase our reach, and we've seen that through the Climate Action Summit, and the UNFCCC actually hosted their climate dialogues at the back end of last year virtually as well. So there are some useful learnings and experiences there that we can draw on as we're planning our event. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, Paul Howell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Alok. It's developing the last point, actually, this has been talked to some extent in terms of promoting diversity and inclusivity at the summit. We know there's various populations that are particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change because of their reliance on natural resources, for their livelihoods, or for the multiple forms of discrimination that they face, due to their gender, ethnicity, the level of poverty, etc. How do we make sure we hear from these diverse populations and not just those that are shouting loudest?
Yeah, Paul, I think this is a really, really important point. And one of the things that we have done is set up a civil society and youth advisory group. I mean, as I understand, it's the first time through any COP process this has happened. And we've had a couple of meetings of that. The co-chairs, in fact, are two young activists, one from the Global North and one from the Global South. And the makeup of that is, of course, NGOs, civil society groups, indigenous peoples groups, youth representatives. So I think we have put together a group which is diverse. But one of the key discussion points that we always have
actually sanctions countries that do not have gender.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. One of the key issues, of course, as part of that discussion has been that how do you meaningfully involve those groups and those individuals as part of the COP agenda. We have a climate and development event that's being organized for March, which will bring together both developed countries as well as developing countries. And one of the things that I have ensured, and I've made my commitment clear to the civil society groups, is that they will be involved in a very meaningful way as part of this process. And the reality is that they are often the ones who know how to effectively deliver local solutions, and they need to be part of that discussion. Obviously, at the Climate Ambition Summit, as well as world leaders, we also had speeches from civil society groups. And so, it's going to be a really, really important part of the whole process to make sure that everybody feels included. We're of course going to have the green zone as well, where there'll be an opportunity for third parties to effectively set out their stall, if I can put it like that. We will look, of course, to see which civil society groups, which NGOs apply to have a place in the green zone as well.
Thanks, Alok. And I guess, as you've already said in the previous question, the way that technology for communication has moved along in COVID is another opportunity to push into that space. Could I just ask one other question in terms of inclusivity? How do you engage with the public on COP26? And then how do you leverage that engagement through COP26 to get better engagement thereafter? This is it's getting the man in the street to actually engage further than he is now. I think there's a trend in the right direction, but how do we really get into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the things that it's important to also demonstrate to the public is that, the green agenda that we're following is not something in isolation. It's something that is about improving people's lives, is about creating value-added jobs going forward. And you know, as a country, we've demonstrated that we can do clean growth. So I mean, you know, one of the stats we always use is that over the past 30 years, we've grown our economy by 75% and yet cut emissions by 43%. So, you know, we've seen the 10-point plan, the energy white paper that we produced before Christmas. I know you'll be asking questions on that. So it's very important for us to show the connection between what we're doing with people's lives as well. We launched the Together for Our Planet campaign. This was launched virtually in November last year, 1 year out from COP. I can tell you that the campaign has already reached 4.5 million people on social media channels. We've got a range of events that are going to be taking place during this year to connect people with the COP agenda, as well as all the work that we are doing in terms of the domestic green agenda as well. And I think connecting with young people as well. So there's an art competition that has been launched in collaboration with WWF that happened before Christmas. This week we will be launching a campaign to get volunteers in Glasgow to come forward in the same way as happened you know, during the Olympics, to come forward and support with the physical event when it takes place. So there is a lot of thinking that is going on right now in terms of that public-facing campaign, and how do we take the UK public with us. And I'm very happy, Chair, to come back at some point in the future and talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's going to be really important. What we do not want COP to be is seen as something where a whole bunch of world leaders fly in and fly out with no connection to the lives of you know, people in the UK, indeed around the world. And we have to galvanize and energize when it comes to that particular public-facing campaign.
Thanks, Alok. I absolutely agree that it should be with people as opposed to to people. And on that point, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. The last question for you, Alok, is from Zara Sultana.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. The government has published a 10-point climate plan, including a commitment to phase out petrol and diesel cars, but at the same time has committed to building £27 billion of new roads and hundreds of thousands of new homes that won't adhere to net carbon zero standards. What does this say about the government's commitment to its climate target ambitions?
Well, I think if you look at the 10-point plan, you're right. You know, we have committed to ensuring that we don't have the sale of petrol and diesel, you know, beyond 2030, new petrol and diesel cars beyond 2030, and hybrids 2035. I mean, I have to say to you, you know, I have spoken, you know, obviously before we launched the 10-point plan, but also subsequently to that. I've had very good discussions with the auto sector. I think they've appreciated the fact that, you know, on the one hand, we have announced this ambitious target, but on the other hand, we also announced almost £3 billion worth of support in terms of charging stations, in terms of the supply chain, supporting that, supporting the building of gigafactories, and of course, also providing incentives through grants for people to buy these vehicles. Look, I mean, I think what I would say, you know, happy to get into the detail of this in writing if colleagues want. But what I would say overall on this point, Chair, is that you know, I certainly believe very much in carrot rather than stick, and where you incentivize people to make a change, that is absolutely the best way forward. So if I, you know, the example of the grants on to get people to take up zero-emission vehicles, the Green Homes grant that we've launched, all of those, I think, are good examples of where the government is ensuring that we are supporting people around our country to make those changes, which incrementally will support getting to net zero by 2050.
Thank you, Alok, and thank you, Zora. That brings the first session to an end. So thank you to COP President Alok Sharma, Peter Hill, COP CEO Archie Young, the lead climate negotiator, and Ros Ailes, the Chief Operating Officer at COP26 for your time. We're now going to move immediately on to our next session for today with the new Secretary of State. Welcome, Kwasi Kwarteng, new Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Strategy. And with Kwasi, we have Joanna Whittington, who is the Director General for Energy and Security, Jo Shanmugam, who's the Director General for Industrial Strategy, Science and Innovation, and Ashley Ibbett, who's the Director General for Trade, for Europe and Analysis. Welcome to all of you this morning. Secretary of State, welcome in your new capacity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. I'm very much looking forward to your questioning.
Great. So our first, the bulk of our questions today, Secretary of State, are on the Energy White Paper, and then we have a few other.
Sure. Thank you.
The Energy White Paper, you'll have seen from our previous session, was very welcomed by industry and many stakeholders as being a pretty bold document, and so we were pleased to see that. You've recognised, as has the department before, there's still a gap between the carbon budget and a little of a gap between the fourth and the fifth budget and the projections in the Energy White Paper. How are we going to bridge that gap, building on the Energy White Paper in the months and years to come?
I think that's a very fair question, Mr. Chairman, and you will know that as far as the 3 carbon budget periods are concerned, the first one we met, the second one we met quite convincingly, the third one we're on track to meet. And you're quite right to say there's a gap between the fourth and fifth. We're working very closely with the Committee on Climate Change. I think there's plenty of stuff in the Energy White Paper, and also more crucially in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan that was announced in November, which will be enable us to bridge the gap, as you've identified, between the aspirations of the CCC carbon budget 6 period and where we are now. There's still a way to go. I think you're right to acknowledge that, but there are lots and lots of policies, lots of things that we have to deliver on to close that gap. And the last thing I'd say about that is that there'll be a legislation in the summer which will seek to put into law the carbon budget 6 targets that were put forward by the CCC.
Great, that's really good to hear. Thank you for that. There's some topical news at the moment about the decision to grant a new coal mine in Cumbria.
Yeah.
Have you had any discussions with MHCRG? Because surely this isn't the right thing for our country in the context of the discussion today.
Again, I think you're right. There is a slight tension between the decision to open this mine and our avowed intention to take coal off the gas grid. I'll just say a couple of things about this. Obviously, there are 2 types of coal we're talking about. In terms of thermal coal, which is burnt for electricity generation, we want to take that off the grid by 2025, and we look to do so by 2024. So it's a rare example of a government target actually being reached ahead of time, as it were. The coking coal, which is used in industrial processes, is a different issue. And there was a debate, I can be frank about that. There was a debate in the government about what we could do about this. But as you will know, Mr. Jones, I mean, this was a local decision. This was a local planning decision. And the argument, I think, is a fair one, which says that we have steel processes, we have industrial processes which use coking coal. And if we don't have sources of coking coal in the UK, we would be importing those anyway. So the real mission, my mission as Secretary of State, is to try and decarbonize the industrial process. And we've got an industrial decarbonisation strategy coming out in the first quarter of this year. We have a clean steel fund, which is encouraging steel manufacturers to decarbonise their manufacturing process. But you're quite right that there is a slight tension between the opening of this mine and our avowed intention to decarbonise.
Thank you for that. I'm now going to call Philip Dunn.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and congratulations, Secretary of State, on your elevation. You've appeared before our committee before in looking at policy implementation challenges. The Energy White Paper is very pleasing to see now published. A lot of policy initiatives have been awaiting its publication, and you're also aware that there's been advice from the Committee on Climate Change and the government itself that getting policies adopted quickly will ease the path to net zero. It's encouraging to hear there's a legislation coming. How are you going to square the conundrum of getting policies in place so that measures can be taken by industry can invest, and doing so in a way that is not going to be beset by some of the early problems that we've already seen, for example, in the Green Homes Grant Scheme, where many installers are losing staff and unable to take up the vouchers that are available. Poor implementation, in other words.
I think, Mr. Dunn, you raise a crucially important point. I think the department has been effective at coming up with policies. I think the EWP, the Energy White Paper, was well received. And on the back of that, certainly in my old role as Energy Minister, I commissioned policies on industrial decarbonisation, on hydrogen, and also on the homes and heat and buildings strategy. Once we publish those, which will be in the next couple of months, 3 months, we will then have to be in an implementation period. And that is really where the critical challenge lies. I think that the Prime Minister's 10-point plan with respect to hydrogen, the target we've set there, with respect to offshore wind as well, gives us a very clear roadmap in terms of implementation and delivery. And that's what 2021 will be very focused on.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philip. Richard Fuller, please.
Chair, welcome, Secretary of State. As you rightly said, there's lots of good ambitions in the Energy White Paper, and as you're putting those together, could you just for the record say what the estimated total cost to the British economy will be, or the range of costs that are anticipated to implement the plan?
So Richard, you'll appreciate in terms of from the consumer point of view, it would be very difficult to come up with a number because consumer bills are generally driven by wholesale prices. So there's no way, there's nobody in the world that can tell you, Richard, Mr. Fuller, forgive me, that what the wholesale price will be in 2030. There are some initial costs in terms of trying to drive the decarbonisation agenda. But what I would say about that is that according to the manifesto that you stood on and that I was elected on, we have huge commitments to make sure that the most vulnerable in society actually are protected. So we've got something like £9.2 billion committed in the manifesto to making sure that people in fuel poverty, programs like the Warm Homes discount, the ECO, the energy company obligation, and also the Green Homes grant can actually alleviate and make people more able to go through any cost that might arise. But I can't give you a figure as to the actual costs on consumer because I don't know what the wholesale prices will do.
No, obviously how the costs get allocated and what that will do in terms of wholesale pricing is one aspect. But for all of the ambitions, the steps that we're trying to take, the cost that we've incurred on industry, so right at the top level as an appraisal, as one might do for an impact assessment, what's sort of the overall size of all of those costs before we decide how that might trickle through into who's going to be paid for what and how it's going to be end up with consumers?
But again, I would say that one of the things that we're missing in all of this is the fact that there's a huge amount of energy efficiency and also better practices in the generation of power. I mean, if you look at offshore wind, for example, nobody would have predicted. I mean, you and I were elected in 2010. None of us predicted at that time that the costs of offshore wind generation would have fallen as quickly as they have done. So I don't think that it's fair to try and predict what the actual eventual cost would be in 9 years' time.
No, look, absolutely right. And that's one of the great things about the response is that as the government has set a clear path, the private sector has responded and beaten expectations in many cases in terms of cost.
Yeah.
But I do think it is, you mentioned the word fair, Secretary. I think it is fair to the country as a whole to have some sense of, we are leading on this. There are going to be costs and someone is going to have to pay. Just to prepare people, it might actually end up being an upside surprise because, as you say, the cost may be lower.
Exactly.
Can you give the committee any sense of your thinking about how that communication of the costs to the public will go alongside the implementation of the plan?
But you put it very well in your question. I mean, you yourself have admitted that there's a potential upside. So that in terms of the cost, so it's a very difficult thing to estimate, and I would be very reluctant to try and put a figure on something that's going to have an effect over 10, 20, 30 years.
Final quick question, Chair, if I can. We had an interaction with the Climate Change Commission, and the head of that was keen to start the dialogue on the costs. Is the CCC a group that you might lean on to help sort of clarify some of those costs as we move forward?
We have very good relations as a department with the CCC. I spoke to Lord Deben, who is the chair, Chris Stark, the CEO. I speak to them very regularly. And I did so in my role as Energy Minister. And I'm very pleased to say that I've already spoken to Lord Deben after 8 days in the job. And I look forward to working with him and his committee very closely.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Mark Jenkinson, please.
Good morning, Secretary of State. Can I just firstly welcome your clarification on the coal?
Sure.
Obviously, we see, again, because we see a lot of conflation between thermal coal and metallurgical coal. Just to change the subject slightly, the Energy White Paper commits to fully decarbonise the power sector by 2050, which some call unambitious. Could you set out some of the thinking behind the 2050 date, specifically around that decarbonisation, and why not say 2035 as some might prefer?
It's a very good question, Mr. Jenkinson. I'll say a couple of things about it. The 2050 target is certainly achievable in terms of the decarbonisation of power. So since between 2010 and 2019, carbon emissions fell by 58% in the power sector. We are also in a world which in 2019, the last year for which we have figures, something like 54% of the power generation was in low carbon power and 37% was renewables. The reason why we haven't accelerated that is that we've got to do this decarbonisation looking at consumer bills, trying to protect the consumer in terms of pricing. We need a realistic target as well. And we feel that 2050 is about right. The other thing I would say is that there are other technologies that will be emerging that will be able to decarbonize more cheaply. So it would be premature in a way to try and aim for a target that's so short in the distant future, But I would say that we're hitting our targets. And actually in this whole debate about decarbonisation, I would suggest to you that the power sector is probably the most successful area in which we've decarbonised over the last 10 years.
Thanks. Just to follow up on specifically with nuclear, it's proven quite difficult to finance nuclear projects in recent years, as we've seen. And I welcome the government's commitment to secure to secure one large nuclear investment by the end of the Parliament. What assurances can you provide that whichever plant is approved, be it Sizewell C or other, will be operational by 2031? What are the implications if it isn't? And what have we learned from Hinkley that would assist?
I think that's a very fair question, and I think Hinkley Point C has had its difficulties, but actually broadly, it seems that it's very much on target. And let's take Sizewell C. I don't want to prejudge which site will be our second nuclear power station, if you like, after Hinkley Point C. But if we were to take Sizewell C, a lot of the technology is the same as Hinkley Point C. I think there's a lot of learning by doing. I think it'll be a much more efficient and less costly exercise. And I think I'm confident that if we do Hinkley Point C on time, which is looking likely, or if we miss it, it won't be very much. I think we can deliver Sizewell C in a timely way. And just to finish my answer to your question, nuclear power is essential. We've done all the modelling. We need a firm, what's called firm power, dispatchable power, in order to balance the system. Because clearly, if we have a system which is solely reliant on renewables, that's intermittent technology. That the sun isn't always shining for solar power generation, nor is the wind always blowing for offshore wind and some onshore wind power generation. So there is, I think it's about 15% of the power generation will probably be will be coming from this firm power, and nuclear power baseload is the most effective non-carbon source of that power.
Super. Thanks, Secretary of State. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Paul Howell, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for this, Secretary of State. Really just want to talk about consumers and public engagement, and how we move things forward in this space. How do we ensure that changes from the Energy White Paper are developed with and not to the public? How important is their engagement? How important is it for them to understand the development of new industries, whether that's hydrogen, batteries, solar, whatever, and the positive things that can come from that?
I think that's a fundamental question, because the way that we conduct these debates in policy circles, in government circles, can seem very abstract. All I would say on that is that there is actually quite considerable public engagement with these issues. We have to do more, but there are organisations like the Climate Assembly UK those of us who were elected in 2019 and had experience of other elections, I think will testify, certainly in my case, this was true, that this was the first general election in 5 that I've been a candidate in which climate change issues, in which carbon emissions actually played a part in the campaign. I was struck by the number of times that people actually raised this on the doorstep, but clearly there's a long way to go to try and get the majority of people behind what we're doing. And I think the government has a duty of responsibility in that. I think things like the Climate Assembly are very important. I think as individual MPs, we have a duty as well to talk about these issues in forums held in our constituencies. But there's a way to go, undoubtedly. But I question the idea that there isn't actually a great deal of public engagement in these subjects.
No, I've been endorsed that there's certainly engagement going on, and I know you've got the strategic dialogue on affordability and fairness. What do you hope to achieve from that? And maybe you could also elaborate a little bit in terms of what your plans are for direct public engagement. Is there things we can learn from all the communications that have had to be done through the COVID-19 process that can give us learnings as to how we can get the messages through to people?
I think we've learned. I'll just take the last bit of your question first. I think we've learned a huge amount on. I think we've learned a huge amount through COVID, and particularly also through the Brexit process, of how to engage with the public. And I know you've got questions about EU exit later, but we've spoken to something like 55,000 different businesses. We've had millions of hits on our website with regard to EU exit preparedness. And that's exactly the kind of campaign, that's exactly the kind of move that we want to push in terms of engaging the public on climate change.
Thanks, Secretary of State. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Jerome Mayhew, please.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Secretary of State. I'm interested in questions about what assessment the government has made in relation to the potential impact of the Energy White Paper on the competitiveness of our domestic industry. And I listened to what you said earlier about it being difficult to make assessments in the future of future costs of energy. And yet in the white paper, there is an assessment for domestic fuel bills going out to, first of all, 2025 and then to 2030. But I haven't seen that for industrial fuel costs. Has the government made any assessment on what the likely costs to industry are of the Energy White Paper?
So, Mr. Mayhew, I point out, refer you to my earlier answer in terms of the predictability of these things. Of course, we've made an impact. And the other thing I would say in terms of industrial competitiveness is that there's a huge amount of support that BEIS and the government already supplies to industrial companies trying to decarbonize, trying to help us along our journey towards net zero. We have, as I said, the industrial decarbonisation strategy, which will come out this quarter. We have things like the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, which has £350 million allocated to help industries and companies make that transition. We have a Clean Steel Fund, which is specifically targeted at steel companies. We have various allowances in the ETS scheme, which fund companies to the tune of £1 billion to try and make them more fit to affect this transition. So there's a huge amount of support for industries and particular companies to help them along the way to net zero.
Industrial bodies have set out a number of policies that they would like to see and which they consider to be necessary to enable the UK to deliver on the carbon net zero target, whilst also remaining an attractive location for industrial investment. And actually for this committee in evidence just last week, representatives of industry told us that the following measures would be needed to maintain that level of UK competitiveness. Protections against carbon leakage and industrial offshoring were key. So protections against increased energy prices, capital grants, operational subsidies for carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, and importantly, carbon border adjustments. So what I'd like you to comment on, Secretary of State, is particularly in relation to carbon border adjustment. Is this something that you're hearing more and more from industry And is it something which is rising up in the degree of interest that your department is displaying towards it?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayhew. And you'll remember, as Energy Minister, you conducted a very good debate on carbon border adjustments only a couple of months ago, and I responded to you on the part of the government. And you know that this is something which is not just of local or domestic interest here in the UK, but friends across in the EU are talking very actively about how we can measure carbon and border adjustments. In terms of the other things you mentioned, like carbon leakage, I refer you to my earlier comments about the ETS, where we have something like £1 billion allocated to companies precisely to deal with this issue of carbon leakage. And in my role as Secretary of State, I will be talking to industry bodies. Not only will I be pushing the publication of the industrial decarbonisation strategy, but I will be talking to industry bodies all the time about how we can affect and help them make this transition.
Thank you very much. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Alan Brown, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Secretary.
Hi, Mr. Brown.
If we look at the Ministerial Delivery Group for Renewable Power, can you explain how that will work? What renewable technologies will be the focus, sure, and will it include less mature ones such as wave and tidal?
I hope it will eventually. I'm very keen to promote tidal technology, marine technology in the auction process, in the allocation of the CFD rounds at the end of this year, perhaps. But the Ministerial Responsibility Group is looking at the cross-departmental effects of things like the offshore wind ambition. So we're saying that we want to have 40 gigawatts of capacity for offshore wind by 2030. And you will appreciate, Mr. Brown, that delivering that has all sorts of issues, not just related to my department, which is very much driving the policy and also the industrial capability, but also it has a DEFRA angle in terms of the seabed, mollusks, the way in which wind turbines affect bird life, and that has a DEFRA angle. There's also an angle in terms of dealing with our colleagues in MHCLG, because there are planning issues related to trying to build offshore wind farms. And as a consequence of that, because of the cross-cutting nature of these issues, we thought it would be a good idea to come together and have a ministerial responsibility group, which can try and iron out some of the difficulties in our way to try and reach the target set out very clearly, I might add, in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan.
Okay, and if we look at that policy in the wider mix, in terms of offshore wind, there's a target of 60% UK content to be in the delivery of offshore wind, but yet local content rules are still outstanding. We've seen the problems at BIFAB, where unfortunately been in administration. In Scotland, in the wider context, oil and gas sector deals still outstanding. There's 2 hydro schemes proposed, Corrie Glass and Cruachan Dam extension, but there's no route to market for them. But yet, the one thing the government's willing to commit to is sky-high cost of a new nuclear power station before the end of Parliament. So what are you going to do to actually have a just transition for Scotland and for the UK to rebalance the market?
So, Mr. Brown, you will appreciate that the North Sea transition deal, which is a more accurate way of describing what was called in our manifesto the oil and gas sector deal. That's something that I worked very strongly on and very keenly on as Energy Minister, and we hope to deliver a transition deal very early in this new year, which is way ahead of the commitment that we made in the manifesto, which said that we would have this sector deal done before the end of the Parliament. So we're ahead of the curve on that. The other thing I would say is I think you're quite right. I think the 60%.
Can I just ask, will that deal align? Can I ask, will that deal align with the decommissioning of North Sea assets and consideration of CCUS and how that's deployed as part of that sector deal?
It's a key part of the transition. I've been very clear with colleagues and people I've spoken to in the oil and gas sector that there's no way that they can have any form of government support unless they are absolutely committed to the net zero ambitions. So any form of transition deal will have a very strong component which will force them to take steps to decarbonize their processes. And the other thing I would say about that is that we had a licensing review, and that was initiated by my predecessor, which again is looking at how we conduct future licensing rounds with the industry, with respect to trying to force them to think more deeply and actually do things about decarbonisation. And frankly, I think the industry has responded well to the fact that we want them to cooperate with us in affecting the transition.
Okay, thanks. If I just move on, but can I just ask, will I give serious consideration to the hydro projects and the route to market?
Absolutely. This was something that came across my desk as Energy Minister, and it's absolutely something that I'm particularly interested in as Secretary of State, to make sure that we have, I mean, Scotland has great opportunities in hydropower, and that's something that we need to promote. Okay, if I do a complete switch of topic to Brexit, we know obviously there's been high-profile demonstrations from the shellfish industry because can't get their products to market. There's other export issues being announced about meat rotting and where it's held up in Rotterdam and elsewhere. So in terms of import and export, how successful British business has been the UK-EU trade agreement? Is it really teething problems, or is it the deal itself? I think these are teething problems. I mean, we were in the EU for 47 years. I have to say that a lot of the predictions about, total congestion and chaos, thankfully, have failed to materialize. That doesn't mean that we're out of the woods, and we still got to engage with businesses, as my department is doing all the time, to see where there are bottlenecks and to see if there are problems. But I think the most scary predictions were not borne out in reality. And I'm confident that we will be able to get to a regime where we will have a much more smoother process. I mean, one of the things that HMRC is doing on this is taking a phased approach to border controls. I think that we will take about 6 months to get to a fully straight application of the regime. And I think that actually that if we look at the trade deal, yes, people say, well, it wasn't a comprehensive deal on services, but we have to remind ourselves, this was the most comprehensive deal that the EU has ever had with any country on services. Not only was it a comprehensive deal on goods, it was actually quite a full deal on services. And I think it has been quite successful.
Can I just bring you back to the products which have been held up? So there's millions and millions of pounds of food's been lost. Is the government looking at compensating these firms before they go bust?
There are a huge amount, and the other thing we haven't mentioned is, of course, there's COVID on top of the Brexit issue. So a lot of the issues relating to things like the collapse of the price of fish, are related to the fact that all the restaurants in France are closed. There's no demand for fish in France at the moment. So that just as an illustration, but a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, the difficult issues we're dealing with, are also associated with COVID. And as you know, Mr. Brown, we have provided unprecedented amounts of support through my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We've provided unprecedented amounts of support to businesses through this difficult time.
Just one final question on that. There's a urgent question in the chamber about visas for musicians, but there's also a wider infrastructure issue. And I've got a company in my constituency directly affected, where normally they would move staging equipment for bands. We'd maybe go with bands in a 2-month tour in the EU. There's no way they can get permission to do that because of the permitted operations. What assessment has the government made of the number of companies that are affected in terms of the music entertainment business? I believe it affects Formula One as well, where they can't do the touring because of the current agreement. What's been done to rectify this?
I think this is a really serious issue, and I think there's been a slight misapprehension about it. As far as the deal was concerned, we offered a deal on this in terms of the ease of movement of musicians and other people in the entertainment industry. And I think it was very much the EU who refused to accept our offer on this. And I think there's been a slight miscommunication on that. I'm convinced that we will resolve these issues, and they're a part of an ongoing conversation. But we're fully aware of the difficulties in this particular area.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Obviously, all of us could talk for hours on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Secretary of State, I mean, we've heard as a committee that I think the numbers were there's normally 10,000 trucks a day going through Dover. It's about 2,000 at the moment. That shipping container prices have gone from about the equivalent of $2,000 to $12,000 a container. And the Road Haulage Association said today that it's a chaotic and deteriorating situation, especially at Dover. The Prime Minister said to me at Liaison Committee last week that these were kind of teething problems. If they're teething problems, but the situation is getting worse, how quickly are we going to resolve these problems so that exporters can get back to business?
I think these are fair points, but I'll just refer you to what I said to Mr. Brown. Not only have we had Brexit, but also by a strange coincidence, we've got a global pandemic. And any cursory look at the economic figures of 2020 and also in the first quarter of this year shows that the global economy has been absolutely ravaged in some instances by the pandemic. So you've seen a collapse in demand. I mentioned fish prices in the market. There are no restaurants in France. France is one of the biggest fish-eating, fish-loving populations in the world. And so there's a huge collapse in demand there. And there are issues with trade in terms of people moving, being quarantined, having to be put in self-isolation. The fact that the aviation industry is under great pressure because people are constraining movement. So there are lots of swirling circumstances here, which mean that the economic situation is unclear, and it's also difficult. With respect to the Brexit issue, I'm confident that we will be able to reach very normal conditions quite soon. But of course, about the pandemic, I have less sight on that. There's nobody in the world that can tell you when the pandemic will have done its worst and be over.
Sure. On the Brexit issue, I mean, there's some kind of just real world nuts and bolts issues. So there's this issue of paperwork and making sure people are correctly in advance. There's been an issue around payment of duty payments within member states when British companies are exporting, and that's causing some confusion in addition.
That's right.
How is the department engaging on these particular real life issues to make sure that they're being resolved as quickly as possible?
So, as you may know, Mr. Jones, I think towards the end of the last year, particularly under my, the excellent initiative of my predecessor, the department was totally geared, essentially from October, to be engaging with businesses, and we're continuing to do that. So something like, we have a transition checker online. I think that's been checked at least 400,000 times in the last 2 months. We've corresponded with something like 4.7 million businesses, again, in the last 3 or 4 months. And that was all put in place by my predecessor. And we've also managed to relay huge amounts of information to our stakeholders in small business, in medium-sized business, and of course, larger businesses. We've talked to something like 55,000 businesses directly in the last few months, and since October 2020. So there's a huge amount of engagement that BEIS is doing. And of course, we want to continue doing that because clearly, as you appreciate, we're not out of the woods yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot of people who want clarification. And on that, we've launched webinars, which are increasingly popular as well. So we're really trying to engage and inform businesses about what's going on.
Thank you for that. And just moving on to business engagement and the ongoing COVID issues, the Prime Minister announced a new business council that he hosted at number 10. Are you part of that? And if so, how does your engagement with business at the department that you run engage with the number 10 initiative?
So I was very pleased and honoured to be invited to the conference, the call that we had yesterday. I think the newspapers have reported on that. And it was a very useful and open conversation that the Prime Minister had, along with myself, with the Secretary of State for International Trade and also the Chancellor, about the kinds of opportunities we see in 2021 and going forward, about things relating to innovation, relating to the strong desire on the part of the Treasury to increase, and the Chancellor to increase our skill base, and also infrastructure. I mean, there's some very exciting plans that the Chancellor is formulating and has announced relating to infrastructure. So it was a very good discussion. I'm very pleased to say that as Secretary of State, the new Secretary of State for BEIS, I was able to attend that conference.
Thank you for that. Now, as a BEIS committee, and no doubt as a department, we're getting lots of representations from different parts of the economy about the ongoing support for business. We don't really have time to go through all of them, but just to name a few, I mean, the FSB has talked about up to 250,000 of small businesses at risk of going bust because of cash flow issues. There's concern around the indebtedness that many businesses now have and the terms of being able to repay that. There's the issue of commercial rents that need to be resolved. The hospitality sector has asked for a continuation of VAT and business rates, deferrals. We have the Excluded UK campaign for many company directors who have not had any support yet. We have the events industry, the non-essential retail industry, and others who are making representations. Are we going to see a refresh of the financial support in the upcoming budget? And what are the specific things that you're asking for as Business Secretary to meet the demands of very significant parts of the economy that feel like they don't currently have the reassurance they need to get through the COVID crisis?
I think, Mr. Jones, you're right. I think it's absolutely vital as Business Secretary that I make representations around the Cabinet table, and particularly to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, about business and championing the interests of business. I was very privileged and lucky and happy to attend a Hospitality UK forum, which was ably chaired by my colleague Paul Scully, the Minister for Hospitality, the Minister who is responsible for that, last week. And they were very, very clear, and they put across very ably the real distress in many instances that they're suffering. And I think that some of their proposals need to be looked at, and I'm sure are being considered by the Treasury. And I'm very happy to make representations on their behalf. Having said all of that, I mean, we can't forget the huge amounts of support that we've already provided to try and maintain the viability of our economy. I mean, we've spent something like £285 billion already trying to sustain businesses. And to put that in context, I mean, that, when I entered Parliament in 2010, we had a record deficit of 160 billion. That was the deficit then. It was unprecedented. But the amounts that the way in which we're supporting business, it dwarfs even the borrowing that we had in 2010. And I think it shows the extent to which the Treasury and the government are leaning in and trying to support the economy.
Thank you for that. I think one of the main asks that's come to us is around making sure that borrowing and that spending is being targeted in the most efficient way.
I agree.
So it's just not kind of a one size fits all. There's time and a need for that. Just lastly from me, before I come to Paul Howell, part of that conversation is about the rewrite of the industrial strategy, which your predecessor said was going to be happening over this year. Is that still the case? Are we still committed to refreshing the industrial strategy?
Yeah, we're absolutely looking at trying to focus and direct, I think, in a more laser-like fashion, what was written, after all, in 2017. I mean, if we look at the industrial strategy, that was produced, was presented to the world, if you like, at the end of 2017. Now, if you look at where we were in 2017 to where we are now, it's a completely different picture. In 2017, we didn't have a Brexit deal. We didn't know anything about the COVID-19 virus. We didn't know anything about the kind of response that we would have to the virus. And so it's quite right, I think, given the changes we've seen very recently, to refresh the strategy and to rethink it. We're still committed to intervening and helping business, guiding growth in a way, but the way that our approach has to reflect modern recent conditions, not the conditions of 2017.
Thank you for that. I'm going to call Paul Howell next, please. Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I just had a problem with the mute button. I should know how to use it by now. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Secretary of State. Just want to talk about the mine workers pension scheme, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you are possibly aware, I'm one of 50 colleagues who wrote to the government on this subject. As part of the road to recovery post-COVID, it's obvious that the old coalfield constituencies will need some extra help. And successive governments have taken over 4 billion out of the mine workers pension scheme in surplus payments through the 50-50 split arrangement. A 70-30 split in favour of the ex-mines would still leave the government with a healthy income, but more importantly, put some real money back into these coalfield communities. Can I ask, does the government have a plan to distribute any of the 1.1 billion remaining in the scheme of these reserves to the retired miners' pensions?
I think it's a very fair question, and I think I met you when I was the Energy Minister about this very subject. And what I said then, and I certainly met a number of opposition MPs on this, and I fully understand where they were coming from. What I would say about that is that obviously there's a reserve, and as you know, stock prices don't always go up. And what the government reserve does is that it ensures that if there is any downturn, and it looked for a large part of the early part of last year, that markets would be absolutely decimated. And in that instance, the government reserve, the 50-50 split, actually ensured that the mine pensioners, the mine workers pension scheme was able to deliver. It guaranteed a strong positive return, even when markets were going down. And the government is committed to guarantee that. Now, the way in which the guarantee works means that we do have to have a split along the lines that you've said. But I'm always looking looking at the scheme and seeing how it can work better. So you can certainly address this issue to me in the first instance, as it was something that I was very conscious of when I was the Energy Minister.
Thanks, Secretary of State. I think it's always easy in hindsight when a scheme's doing well
exactly.
to have this view. But we are in hindsight situation now. We have that opportunity, and I really would encourage you to try and see if there's something you can do for these communities.
But you can see, Mr. Howell, that if we were to change it, and for whatever reason there was a downturn, the protection that we provide through the scheme would be a lot less, and then you, in your excellent capacity as an MP, would be saying we should put more money in to secure the downside. So it's a difficult issue. I think the 50-50 split works, but we do review it all the time.
Yeah, as I said, I would encourage you to review it, but yeah, I accept what you're saying.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean, just to emphasise, I think it was nearly 50 MPs on a cross-party basis, right?
So sure.
It's felt quite strongly.
No, they did, and I engaged with them on this issue a number of times. I think we certainly had conversations in Parliament about it. I think there may even have been a debate. I can't remember, but it's something that was widely discussed when I was the Energy Minister.
Thank you. Zara Sultana, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start off my question about by mentioning the UK-Africa summit, because it was something the COP president mentioned in the panel earlier. More than 90% of the 2 billion in energy deals struck at the UK-Africa summit this time last year were for fossil fuels, despite a government commitment to support African countries in their transition to cleaner energy. My question is, why doesn't the government's actions abroad reflect its commitment at home?
So I dispute that. I think that the most significant one of the most significant announcements in this area in terms of international trade was the Prime Minister's commitment last December, essentially to stop funding fossil fuel projects overseas. And this was an issue that was discussed in cabinet committees. People had differing views. But in the end, the Prime Minister actually came down very firmly on the side of the people who said we should stop any funding of fossil fuel projects outside the UK. So that demonstrates a consistency of purpose there. In terms of the African summit and the deals that we've done, we've got to distinguish between a couple of things. A lot of these fossil fuel deals are gas-powered stations, which, even though they are carbon emitting, are much less carbon emitting than coal. So if you take a country like South Africa, which is heavily dependent on coal, part of the transition in that instance is to wean, if you like, the country from a dependency on coal to invest in gas-powered power generation. Now, yes, the gas-powered generation is carbon emitting, but it's a lot less than that which is derived from coal. So it's a part of the transition. And in a lot of developing countries, the transition will involve moving away from coal-powered, coal-source power to gas power, even though gas power, as you know, is still carbon emitting.
Thank you for that response. My second question is talking about the levels of funding that has been pledged. So the EU has committed €1 trillion to a Green Deal. Similarly, President-elect Biden has committed to invest 2 trillion. On hydrogen strategies, France is committing 8 billion euros and Germany 6 billion. The UK is only committing 240 million. So why does the white paper not meet the scale of ambition that we're seeing elsewhere in the world?
So in terms of energy projects, we've got to get away from the idea that 100% is coming from the public purse. If you look at offshore wind, the deployment of offshore wind, and this was something I was very involved with as energy minister, if you actually look at the figures, something like £94 billion has been committed to the deployment of offshore wind in this country, to the point where we're the largest offshore wind, we've got the largest offshore wind capability in the world. We have something like 35% of the production capacity in offshore wind. But the vast majority of that spending came from the private sector. It didn't come from taxpayers' money. And the way we achieve success in hydrogen, in CCUS, will be through incentivizing private investment. So just looking at the amounts that governments commit to as part of their investment, I don't think is a fair way of assessing our capability. And what we've been very successful at, more successful than any other country, I would suggest, is in actually attracting private capital and private investment in the deployment and of this renewable technology. And that's what we should be judged on.
You mentioned offshore wind, and I think the commitment to rapidly develop the UK's offshore wind resources is very welcome. My question is, why are we diverting resources towards new nuclear when the cost of renewables right now is plummeting?
So I think I tried to address this issue, and it's a fair question. If you were to have an energy system which was entirely based on renewables, it would actually be far more expensive, because the renewables are intermittent. They're called, and that means that if you have a solar power station, the sun doesn't always shine. So there'll be large portions of the day where you're not actually generating any power. The same is true of offshore wind and wind turbines generally, onshore, whether they're onshore or offshore. You'd have to have far more capacity to be able to have continual power generation. And on top of that, you're paying National Grid a huge amount of money to balance the system. So in any energy system, you need what's called firm power. You need a firm, stable source of power. And in terms of a decarbonized source of firm power, nuclear actually fits the bill. I mean, I'm open to other ideas of non-intermittent, decarbonized energy sources. But the nuclear industry does provide firm power. And I think any modeling, and that was one of the first things I did as energy minister, is I commissioned a series of models to see how we got to 2050 in a decarbonized way. But any model showed that a source of firm power, in this case nuclear power, meant that it was much more inexpensive, much cheaper to do that than just to have a system that's fully dependent on renewables.
Thank you for the offer of listening to alternative kind of ideas.
I'd love to hear those ideas. I mean,
Absolutely. My final question is about the white paper not including a date or a plan for new homes to be built zero carbon, and not including shipping and aviation targets in the UK's emission totals. When will the government address these emissions in the white paper?
I've said clearly that I think shipping and aviation needs to be addressed. I mean, that has to be part of our calculus in terms of net zero. You will appreciate that in terms of housing, I have lots of very good conversations with MHCLG, and we have to work very closely with them in terms of the housing policy and the aspiration that we have in that. And it was felt that the energy white paper was something which we owned as energy ministers and as BEIS, but we didn't want. We thought it would muddy the waters, if you like, if we were to stray on the housing issue. But we've got a heat and buildings strategy that's coming out imminently, I hope in this quarter. And I'm sure that I'll be very happy to take questions from your committee about that in due course.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Zara. Secretary of State, can I just ask, there was some reporting that we'd be expecting an updated employment rights bill this year. Is that correct?
We are absolutely looking at safeguarding employment rights. And I know there have been stories in the newspaper that there was going to be some sort of bonfire of rights and that we were going to scrap rights. I think this could not be further from the truth. I have to rebut this very clearly. we feel that we are enshrining rights and we can protect rights. And one of the things that I'm very proud of as Energy Minister and also as Secretary of State in the 9 days I've been in the job is that I've reached out to trade union leaders. I spoke to Francis O'Grady last week, and my firm conviction is that we're never going to get to net zero or have a chance of doing so unless we work very closely with trade unions on skills, on employment opportunities. And I think the world, the industrial relations, if you want to use that phrase, of the 2020s and 30s, will be nothing like the world that we emerged from, at the end of the 20th century, the sort of 70s and 80s. I think it's a completely different debate, and I don't want to be dragged back into that world of the 1970s.
I think the concerns in the press were about comments that you had co-authored or supported, albeit along in 2012, 2013.
It's a long time ago now, Mr. Jones. I mean, it was a long time ago.
I understand, but the comments were of concern, I think, Sam, where you said that British workers were among the worst idles in the world, and you suggested that the national minimum wage should be different in different parts of the country. I mean, do you want to take this opportunity to distance yourself from those comments? Now that
a book written by a bunch of backbench MPs, nearly 10 years ago, I don't think is particularly relevant to the kind of problems and issues that we face. I mean, if you look at the world of 2011, who was talking about net zero? We weren't talking about the net zero challenge. We weren't talking about the industrial opportunities that would come from net zero. We weren't talking about global leadership in the fight against climate change. We weren't talking about even Brexit. I mean, that was a speck on the horizon if anyone could see it. So it was a very, very different context. We could have a philosophical debate, if you like, about the nature of the state, the nature of free markets, and that kind of thing. And it's a very interesting debate, but I don't think being wedded to a text from 10 years ago is particularly constructive a way of conducting future debates about really important issues in the 2020s.
Okay, I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, just looking at something that exists today, I mean, I've seen some of the internal documentation from your department, and I think the thing that caused some concern was a consultation being done right now, as I understand it, in the base department, which was consulting on EU-derived employment regulations and how they could be reformed for business post-Brexit. And there was a specific mention to the Working Time Directive, which limits work to 48 hours in a week. Why is that consultation taking place, and what's the intended output of it if we're not trying to change workers' rights as they exist today?
I think the view was that we wanted to look at a whole range of issues relating to our EU membership and examine what we wanted to keep, if you like. But I will say now to you that we're absolutely committed. I think we can have a very, very strong, very powerful economy based on net zero, on the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, and also having a really good high standard for workers and high employment and a high wage economy. That's what I'm focusing on. And so the idea that we're trying to whittle down standards, I think is that's not at all plausible or true. What I would say also about that is that you talk about the Working Time Directive. I'm very struck as I go look at EU economies, how many EU countries, I think it's about 17 or 18, have essentially opted out of the Working Time Directive. So even by just following that, we are way above the average European standard. And I want to maintain that. I think we can be a high wage, high employment economy, a very successful economy. And that's what we should be aiming for.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to put Alan Brown for a quick supplementary, and then I've got 2 quick fire questions at the end. And then okay. So Alan Brown.
Thanks, Chair. If you just return to nuclear power providing baseload, there's 8 existing nuclear power stations at the moment. 4 of them are going to go offline, stop generating before Hinkley Point C comes online. Another 3 are going to go offline before the end of the decade, which is way before any new nuclear power station can then be built. So if we can do without the baseload from these power stations in the meantime, why is this so-called justification that we need a new nuclear power station to provide that baseload?
So for 2 reasons that I've tried to mention. I mean, for a start, and I'll just repeat what I said, if we had a system that was 100% renewables, you'd have to have so much capacity because obviously the wind isn't blowing all the time, the sun isn't shining all the time, and the cost of having that capacity would be very, very high indeed, and it would put a cost on the consumer. So that's why. Forgive me, I'm trying to answer your question. I'm trying to answer
other technologies, but how do we deal with these stations being offline then? Because what you're saying is that the system won't work properly or be too expensive when we don't have these existing power stations online.
Well, that's why we're acting on building the power stations. We hope that Hinkley Point will be delivered in 2025, and we're as we expressed in the white paper, we're open to making a decision on a second power station that will be perhaps even a twin to Hinkley Point C. So we're committed to the nuclear industry, and not only just in large-scale nuclear. I mean, the Prime Minister's, I think it was a third of his 10 points was all about nuclear, and what he said was that we would have small modular reactors. We're very much looking at the research into that and building up capacity in that for the 2030s, and also in the 2040s advanced modular reactors. So we're very committed to this source of power. We think it's a good source of baseload dispatchable power that can balance, a heavy reliance on renewable power.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Just two final quick questions. You have referred to audit reform in comments since becoming Secretary of State, which, as we all know, is something that's been rumbling on for some time. Are you able to give us any sense of dates around, we understand, an outstanding consultation from government? And then... Sure.
So this was very simple. I mean, people sort of interpreted this as a key priority of mine. But what had happened was that we had, as you will know, there were 3 reports on audit reform that came into the department. We had embarked on a white paper on it, and literally on my desk when I entered the office, there was a white paper, and I'm very, very keen, having done the work, that we managed to publish it. And I said to the relevant minister, I think Lord Callanan, that I was very keen to show that we'd actually done work on this, and I was very keen to publish it. And that was one of the first action points that I initiated. Now, in terms of date, obviously it'll have to go through the usual right round process and all the rest of it. But I'm very keen to see that white paper actually hit the ground so that we can start a discussion. It's not the be all and end all. It's not as if we're going to be legislating next week on audit reform. But I think we really have to get the ball rolling, because as you said in the question, there have been lots and lots of reports. We've had lots and lots of debate, but now we just need to push this thing forward.
Good, thank you. And my last question for today, Secretary of State, our inquiry on the Post Office Horizon issue is currently suspended because of the independent review, but we've still got some outstanding questions, primarily about the role of government as a shareholder and how that works internally around check-offs and access to information. There have been concerns from some of the stakeholders on this issue, primarily the victims of what happened in this tragic set of circumstances for many of them, about the independent review itself. Have you got any thoughts at this stage about their engagement with that independent review, and therefore how valid its conclusions will be and how we try to resolve this issue going forward?
I'm assessing all of this information as quickly as I can and trying to process it, because you'll appreciate that being relatively new into the job. I mean, I was a minister in the department before, but I was responsible for energy. And this is an issue which is a really live issue, which I'm getting across very quickly. And I'm very hopeful, I'm sure that, well, hopeful may be the wrong word, but I know that you'll probably be inviting me to your committee to talk about these issues. And I hope that I'll be fully prepared to answer your questions then.
Okay, thank you, Secretary of State. We're going to call the session
thank you.
End today. So thank you to Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Bay Secretary. We're delighted to have you here, and thank you for even though you've just taken on the job, and we'll speak to you soon. And thank you also to your colleagues for being here today, Joanna Whittington, Joe Shan McGalligan, I always get that wrong, forgive me, Joe, and Ashley Ibbett. I'll bring the session now to an end. Order.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kwasi.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Thanks, Philip. Speak to you soon. Cheers now.
Well done.
Thanks, everyone.